The soft hum of violins floated through the Porter residence that evening, a sound Elena Porter had chosen carefully for her 25th wedding anniversary celebration. It was supposed to be a night of elegance, silver candles, champagne flutes, and a love polished by decades of endurance. The restaurant downtown had been David's idea, and he'd insisted on taking over the arrangements. "Just enjoy it for once," he'd told her with that easy grin that had once melted her heart. "You always try to control everything. Let me make this night perfect." So she'd said yes. For the first time in years, she let him plan something without her involvement. The venue, the guest list, even her dress, which arrived 2 days ago in a white box with a handwritten note. "Wear this. It brings out your eyes." Now, standing before her bedroom mirror, Elena smoothed the silver fabric and smiled faintly. The dress shimmered under the warm light. Tasteful, classic. The kind of thing a man proud of his wife might pick out. She adjusted the thin diamond bracelet on her wrist, the same one he'd given her on their 10th anniversary. Back then, he'd clasped it around her arm and whispered, "Forever, Lena." Tonight, she wanted to believe that word still meant something, but there had been cracks, small, sharp, impossible to ignore. Late-night calls. The faint scent of perfume that wasn't hers on his jacket. The way he angled his phone away when she walked into the room. A month ago, she'd even caught him smiling at his screen, the kind of smile people reserve for new love. When she asked what was so funny, he'd said, "Just work stuff, hon." You wouldn't get it. He'd kissed her cheek, walked out and left her with a hollow ache she couldn't name. "Maybe I'm overthinking," she whispered to herself as she applied her lipstick, a soft mauve David once called her. Signature shade. It's our anniversary. Maybe he's planning something big. Her best friend Marcia had raised an eyebrow earlier that day when Elena mentioned how secretive David had been. "Men don't keep good secrets," Marcia had said, folding her arms. "If they're hiding something before an anniversary, it's usually not jewelry." Elena laughed it off, but the words stuck like a splinter under her skin. By 7:30, she was ready. The car David sent us, a sleek black sedan, waited outside. The driver, polite but reserved, handed her a single white rose and said, "Mr. Porter asked me to deliver this." She inhaled its scent, sharp and clean, before placing it in her lap. The city lights blurred past her window as she imagined the night ahead. Speeches, laughter, maybe even a slow dance to their song. The restaurant, Maison Lorette, glowed like something out of a dream. Its glass facade shimmered with gold reflections, and through it she could see tables covered in white linen and crystal. A soft buzz of chatter filled the air. The doorman opened the door for her, and for a brief second she felt young again, like the woman David had once chased across campus with flowers in his hand. Inside, applause broke out as she entered. "Elena, you look stunning," someone called. She smiled graciously, hugging a few familiar faces. Her daughter Julia ran up and kissed her cheek. "Mom, you look like a movie star." Elena laughed. "Where's your father?" Julia gestured toward the stage. "Up there, probably rehearsing his big speech. You know how he loves attention." Elena's eyes followed her gesture, and that's when she saw her. A young woman, maybe 30 at most, sat near the front table. Long chestnut hair, tight red dress, laughed like chimes. She leaned in close to David, touching his arm as if she had every right to. David was smiling. Not the polite, distant smile he used for acquaintances, but the warm, easy one Elena hadn't seen in months. Her stomach twisted. "Who's that?" she asked Julia quietly. Her daughter shrugged. "I think she's one of his event coordinators. Sabrina, I think. Dad said she helped organize tonight." "Oh," Elena said softly, but the word felt sour in her mouth. She took a deep breath, smoothing the front of her dress. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe it was part of the surprise. She found her seat near the front, pretending not to notice the way David and the woman laughed at something together. The waiter poured champagne into her glass, and Elena lifted it absent-mindedly, eyes fixed on her husband. When David finally spotted her, he straightened and smiled as if nothing were amiss. "There she is," he said loudly, tapping his glass for attention. "The reason we're all here tonight." Applause echoed again. He walked toward her, kissed her cheek lightly, too lightly, and guided her toward the table near the stage. His hand lingered on her back just long enough for others to see, but his touch felt rehearsed, detached. "Everything looks beautiful," Elena said softly, scanning the room. He grinned. "It should. I wanted it to be unforgettable." Something about his tone made her chest tighten. Not warmth, not love. Something else. A few minutes later, the lights dimmed slightly. The chatter softened. David raised his glass and stepped onto the stage, his face glowing under the soft amber light. Elena turned slightly in her chair, pride and unease warring in her chest. This was her husband, her partner of 25 years, and tonight he was going to tell their story. She told herself to breathe, to smile, to let go of doubt, but when his eyes lifted from the glass, they didn't find her. They found the young woman in red, and in that one gaze, soft, knowing, intimate. Elena felt something inside her quietly fracture, and when he raised his glass to speak, the narrator's voice would pause for effect. He didn't look at his wife, he looked at her. The sound of glass meeting glass echoed through the elegant hall. The chatter faded, replaced by that polite hush that always precedes a big speech. All eyes turned toward David Porter, confident, charming, every bit the successful man people expected him to be. He stood beneath the soft amber lights, champagne flute in hand, his posture relaxed, his smile wide. To anyone watching, it looked like the moment of a loving husband celebrating a lifelong marriage. But to Elena, sitting a few feet away, it felt like a performance. She folded her hands in her lap, her bracelet glinting under the light. As he began to speak, 25 years, he said with a deep sigh that sounded almost wistful. That's a long time to love someone. A long time to learn, to grow, to change. The guests nodded and smiled. Some whispered to each other, anticipating a sentimental speech, the kind that ends with an emotional toast to loyalty and lasting love. Elena smiled faintly, trying to keep her breathing steady. Maybe she had imagined that strange look earlier. Maybe this was his way of redeeming himself, of showing that despite the rough patches, he was still proud of their story. But then he continued. "Love," David said, glancing toward the audience, "isn't just about time. It's about rediscovery. It's about finding pieces of yourself you thought were gone. Sometimes life surprises you, reminds you that passion can still exist even after decades." The words landed wrong. Too vague, too poetic, too detached from her. Elena tilted her head, studying him. His voice had a strange tremor, not of nerves but excitement. He went on, "We all get lost in the roles we play. Husband, wife, parent, provider. And then one day someone walks into your life and makes you feel seen again." A ripple went through the room. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Marcia's head turned sharply toward Elena, her brow furrowed. Elena's chest tightened. Someone? David's gaze drifted, not toward his wife, not toward the crowd, but toward the woman in red. Sabrina smiled back, a soft, private smile. Elena's stomach dropped. The violinist paused mid-tune as though even the music sensed something had shifted. David lifted his glass. "Tonight," he said, his voice softening, "I want to celebrate not just 25 years of life and partnership, but the rediscovery of what it means to feel alive again." A silence heavy enough to crush the air followed. Someone coughed. A waiter froze mid-step. Elena's hand trembled as she set down her glass. "David," she whispered, barely audible. But he didn't hear her, or he pretended not to. He continued, his tone too intimate for the occasion. "To love that challenges you, that wakes you up, that reminds you who you are beneath the years, Then he turned, facing Sabrina directly. His smile softened. "Here's to love that finds us again. Even when we think it's gone." The world tilted. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then came the collective inhale, the uncomfortable, synchronized gasp of a room witnessing something they shouldn't. Elena's ears rang. The applause that should have followed never came. The silence stretched, sharp as glass. Her daughter's face turned pale. Marcia reached for her hand, but Elena didn't move. Her entire body had gone cold. The young woman, Sabrina, looked embarrassed for half a second, but then her expression shifted into something almost smug. She didn't deny it, didn't flinch, just smiled faintly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, as if the entire world had been waiting for their moment. David lowered his glass, clearly expecting some kind of admiration, maybe even envy. But the only sound was the soft clink of Elena's bracelet against the table as she pushed her chair back. She stood slowly. Every eye followed her. "Elena," David said, blinking, his confident grin faltering. "Honey," she didn't respond. She adjusted the strap of her silver dress, picked up her clutch, and gave him the calmest smile she could manage. "Please," she said quietly, "finish your speech." And then she turned, heels clicking softly against the marble floor, walking through the crowd like a ghost passing through the living. No one stopped her. No one knew what to say. Outside, the night air was cool and sharp. The sound of the city, cars, laughter, sirens, felt like another world. Elena stood on the curb, her breath trembling. Inside, she could still hear muffled voices. Someone saying her name. Someone else whispering, "Did he really just—" She took a deep breath, lifted her chin, and began walking toward the parking lot. Each step steadier than the last. In the car's reflection, she saw herself, calm, composed, beautiful, the kind of woman who'd just been humiliated in front of the world and still refused to break. When the driver opened the door, she held up a hand. "No," she said softly. "I'll drive myself." He hesitated, but she didn't wait for a response. Minutes later, she was behind the wheel, the lights of the city bleeding into streaks across her windshield. She could have cried. She could have screamed. But instead she smiled, just barely, because in that terrible, searing moment, something unexpected had taken root inside her. Clarity. She saw the entire marriage for what it had become, a story she'd been told to believe, rewritten behind her back, and now it was her turn to rewrite it. "He thought I'd vanished into shame," the narrator's voice would lower, carrying quiet power. "But I was walking toward his reckoning." The drive home felt endless. Elena's hands were steady on the steering wheel, but inside her a storm was gathering. The kind that didn't scream or rage, but waited, deliberate and cold. Streetlights streaked across the windshield like ghosts of memories she was already beginning to bury. By the time she pulled into her driveway, the clock on the dashboard read 10:47 p.m. The house was dark, still silent, a perfect reflection of what her marriage had become. She unlocked the front door, walked in, and flicked on the lights. The living room was immaculate. She'd left it that way that morning, preparing for what she thought would be a night of celebration. The champagne glasses were still on the counter. The anniversary cake, white frosting, gold ribbon, sat untouched in its box. She stood there for a long moment, staring at it. Then she laughed, a sound sharp and empty. "Congratulations, Elena," she whispered. "You threw yourself a funeral." She walked to the mirror in the hallway and studied her reflection. The same silver dress, the same woman. But her eyes looked different, calmer, colder, almost unrecognizable all at once. The weight of humiliation began to harden into something else. Focus. She moved to her vanity table, where a pile of unopened mail sat neatly stacked. As she sifted through it absent-mindedly, electric bills, a letter from her insurance, a real estate newsletter, an envelope slipped out and fell to the floor. It wasn't familiar. No stamp, no return address, just her name written in David's handwriting. She tore it open. Inside were several legal documents, deed transfer forms, authorization pages, and at the bottom her own signature, except it wasn't hers. Her pulse quickened. She looked closer, tracing the pen strokes. David had always been good at copying her handwriting. Little gestures over the years, signing gift tags, joking that he knew her so well he could be her. But this was a forged signature on official documents, transferring ownership of their lake cabin entirely into his name. Her mind began to race. That cabin was her inheritance, left to her by her father. It had been in her family for 3 generations. They had agreed to keep it joint property. But now, according to these papers, it belonged to him alone. Her chest tightened. Her humiliation at the party had been public. But this was private betrayal, cold, calculated. She sat back in the chair, her thoughts snapping into clarity like a puzzle finally clicking together. He hadn't just replaced her emotionally. He'd been erasing her, piece by piece, from their shared life. Her phone buzzed on the table. A text from Marcia. "I saw what happened. Are you home? Please tell me you're okay." Elena stared at the message, then typed back, "I'm fine, but I think this goes deeper than I thought." She snapped photos of the documents and sent them to Marcia. Within minutes her phone rang. "Elena," Marcia's voice came through sharp and controlled. "Those are official property transfers. If that's your signature and you didn't sign them, that's forgery. Possibly fraud." "I didn't sign anything," Elena said quietly. "And it's not the first time he's hidden paperwork from me. He handled most of our finances." Marcia hesitated. "You need to stay calm and get copies of everything. Don't confront him yet. Just gather. We'll bring this to my friend. She's a corporate attorney. If he's been moving assets, we'll find it." Elena took a long, steady breath. "He stood in front of everyone tonight and toasted his affair. I think it's time he learns I'm not the kind of woman who breaks quietly." Her friend was silent for a moment. Then she said softly, "That's the voice I wanted to hear." After hanging up, Elena moved through the house with renewed purpose. She opened drawers, rifled through cabinets, checked David's office. The deeper she looked, the more secrets she found. Receipts from expensive restaurants, credit card charges in neighborhoods she'd never visited, and a second phone hidden in his desk drawer. Every discovery stripped away the last illusion that her marriage had simply fallen apart. No, it had been dismantled carefully, while she was busy believing in it. By 2 a.m., she sat surrounded by evidence, files, receipts, notes, spread across the kitchen table like the pieces of a crime scene. Her heart ached, but her mind was razor sharp. This wasn't going to be a shouting match. It was going to be a strategy. Outside, the first traces of dawn began to color the sky. The silver dress she'd worn hours earlier now looked like armor, glinting faintly in the kitchen light. She poured herself a glass of water, sat back and whispered, "You wanted a new beginning, David. You'll get one." Her phone buzzed again, a message from an unknown number. "David, we should talk tomorrow." "About everything." She stared at the screen, her jaw tightening. For years she'd answered every one of his messages, no matter how hurtful, dismissive, or cold. But this time she simply turned the phone face down and let it ring in the silence. He wanted to toast to a new life. The narrator's voice would fade into low piano notes, but she decided she'd give him one he'd never forget. By the next morning, Elena Porter had already crossed a threshold, not of heartbreak but of purpose. The woman who had left that restaurant humiliated was gone. In her place stood someone colder, quieter, and infinitely more dangerous. The sunlight filtered through the kitchen blinds, striping her face with thin bands of gold. On the table before her lay neatly stacked documents, financial statements, old joint account ledgers, and the forged property transfer she'd found the night before. Beside them sat a steaming cup of coffee, black, no sugar, no cream. She had made her decision. Marcia arrived shortly after 8, her expression tense but determined. "I barely slept," she said, setting her bag on the counter. "I kept thinking about that party, about the way he said it." Elena gave a humorless smile. "He wanted an audience. He just didn't realize I'd become his." Marcia sat down, scanning the papers. "This isn't just betrayal, Lena. This is criminal. If he forged your signature, we can prove it. If he used joint funds for that apartment or for her, then I'll have everything I need," Elena interrupted calmly. "To make him answer for every lie." Her voice was low, steady and deliberate. Marcia hesitated. "Do you really want to fight him?" "It'll be messy." Elena looked up from her coffee. "He already made it messy. I'm just cleaning it up." That afternoon she began her quiet investigation. For years David had kept his personal laptop separate from their shared one. He claimed it was for work security, but now Elena noticed something new, a habit she'd overlooked. Every morning he left his office unlocked. Every evening he double-checked the locks, except for the small cabinet by his desk. She waited until he left for work the next day. Then she slipped into his study. It smelled faintly of cedar and aftershave. The curtains were drawn tight. On the desk, beside a stack of mail, sat a small black key. She opened the cabinet. Inside were 3 binders and a thick manila folder. Each binder labeled neatly: investments, DP, partnership agreements, and personal. But the folder, the one unmarked, caught her eye. Inside, she found what she'd been expecting: photos of David and Sabrina at restaurants, boarding a plane, standing arm in arm outside an apartment complex downtown, receipts for rent payments, credit card bills linked to their joint account, but paid to an address she didn't recognize. Elena took photos of everything. Every date, every document, every betrayal captured in crisp, undeniable proof. When she finished, she locked the cabinet again, placed the key exactly where she'd found it, and walked out without a sound. That evening she met with Marcia and her lawyer friend, Catherine Lee, at a small cafe across town. Catherine was a sharp, no-nonsense attorney, with graying hair and eyes that missed nothing. As Elena slid the phone across the table, showing her the photos, Catherine's lips pressed into a thin line. "You're looking at months of financial misconduct," Catherine said. "Depending on how he transferred the funds, there could be tax fraud involved too. If this is joint money, you have every right to pursue it." Elena nodded, her face expressionless. "I want to be thorough. I don't want revenge in the dark. I want truth in daylight." Catherine studied her for a moment. "Most women come to me shaking." "You're terrifyingly calm," Elena smiled faintly. "He spent 25 years underestimating me. I'm just returning the favor." Over the next week, Elena lived 2 lives. In public, she was the wounded wife, polite, composed, softly apologetic. When mutual friends called or texted, she told them she was taking time to heal. Her voice always gentle, her words always controlled, but in private she was documenting everything. She created a timeline of his deception. Every transaction, every phone call, every lie. She even installed a small recorder in his office, under the guise of returning his repaired lamp. At night, when she couldn't sleep, she scrolled through the recordings. Most were routine, David on calls, emails read aloud. But one night, the recorder caught something different. His voice. And hers, Sabrina. "She's fragile," David said on the recording, laughing. "If I do this right, she'll think it's her idea to move out. I'll give her the house, the sympathy, whatever she wants. Once it's settled, I'll cash out the lake property and we're gone." Her voice, Sabrina's, was playful, coy. "So I'll finally get to see the cabin you keep bragging about?" "You'll get to own it," he said, chuckling. "She'll never see it coming." The sound of glasses clinking followed, a private toast to betrayal. Elena sat in the dark, the faint glow of her laptop illuminating her calm, expressionless face. Then she hit save. By the end of the week, she had everything: documents, audio, photos, bank records. Enough to ruin him publicly and legally, but she didn't move yet. Timing, she realized, was everything. So when David came home late on Friday night smelling of whiskey and arrogance, Elena greeted him with the softest smile. "How was your dinner?" She asked. "Work thing," he said casually, kissing her on the forehead. "You okay?" "Better," she said. "Just reflecting. You were right, you know. Maybe it's time we both started over." He smiled, not realizing he was standing on the edge of his own undoing. "He thought I was grieving." The narrator's voice would soften, the music deepening, but she was building his ruin. The invitation arrived in the mail 3 days later. Sleek, cream-colored cardstock embossed with gold lettering. Networking dinner and charity mixer, hosted by David Porter, Porter Investments. Elena stared at it for a long moment, her fingers tracing the elegant typeface. The same restaurant, the same stage. The same man who had toasted his mistress in front of her would now be standing there again, pretending to be respectable. She smiled slowly. "Perfect." That evening she called Marcia. "He's hosting another event," Elena said, her tone light, almost amused. "I think I'll stop by." Marcia hesitated. "Lena, are you sure you want to walk back into that room?" "Oh, I'm not walking in to hurt," Elena said calmly. "I'm walking in to end it." The night of the event shimmered with the kind of artificial glamour that always accompanied David's functions. Expensive suits, champagne fountains, polite laughter. The kind of night where everyone wanted to be seen. David stood near the bar, radiating charm, shaking hands with investors and politicians. He looked confident, untouched by scandal, untarnished by shame. Sabrina was there too, standing a little behind him, dressed in deep emerald green, her smile sharp as glass. She played the role of colleague, though everyone whispered otherwise. When Elena arrived, the room shifted. Heads turned. Conversations paused. She wore black this time, simple, elegant, deliberate. Her hair swept up, her expression serene. She looked like someone who had already made peace with the storm. David froze for a fraction of a second, his hand tightening around his glass before he recovered. "Elena," he said, feigning surprise. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I wasn't planning to come," she replied smoothly. "But then I thought, why not celebrate what we built together?" The words were polite. The undertone was deadly. He chuckled awkwardly. "Of course. Always welcome." Sabrina's eyes flickered, cautious but curious. Elena took her seat near the front where she'd sat during the last event, the mirror image of the night he'd destroyed her dignity. Only this time she wasn't the victim. She was the director. An hour later, the lights dimmed for David's speech. He tapped his glass again, the same sound that once shattered her heart. "Thank you all for coming," he began, smiling confidently. "It's been an incredible year of growth, resilience, and rediscovery. I couldn't have done it without the people who believe in me, both personally and professionally." His gaze flicked briefly toward Sabrina. The same old arrogance. Elena waited. And when he set down his glass, she rose. "May I say something?" The microphone feedback buzzed softly as she walked onto the stage. The crowd murmured. David tried to mask his discomfort. "Of course, Elena," he said, forcing a smile. "Always good to hear from you." She turned to the audience, her posture straight, voice calm but commanding. "My husband has always loved making toasts," she began. "So tonight I thought I'd make one too." The room went silent. "I want to toast honesty," she continued, eyes sweeping across the faces. "The kind of honesty that doesn't hide behind business dinners, or fake work trips, or someone else's perfume." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Sabrina's smile faltered. Elena reached into her clutch and pulled out a small USB drive. "And since my husband is such a storyteller, I thought I'd share a story of my own." She nodded toward the event manager, who was more than happy to obey the elegant woman who looked like she owned the room. Within seconds, the projector screen behind them flickered to life. The first image appeared, David and Sabrina laughing together at a lakeside restaurant. The next, a bank statement showing rent payments to Sabrina's address. Then a recording, his voice echoing through the speakers. If I do this right, she'll think it's her idea to move out. Once it's settled, I'll cash out the lake property and we're gone." The crowd erupted in whispers. Someone gasped. Sabrina's face drained of color. Elena stood perfectly still. "That recording," she said softly, "was made last month, while he was still sharing a home with me, the woman he promised forever to." David stepped forward, face pale. "Elena, that's enough." "No," she said sharply, her voice slicing through the room. "For 25 years I was quiet, loyal, forgiving. But you made our vows a joke and our anniversary a circus." She turned back to the audience, her expression softening. "So tonight I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to remind every woman in this room, silence is not grace when it protects a liar." A heavy silence followed, broken only by the faint sound of David's breathing through the microphone. Elena lifted her glass, her hand steady. "To the truth," she said, raising it toward him. "May it always find the light." Then she stepped down, leaving him frozen on stage, the crowd staring, the sound of whispers swelling like a rising tide. Outside, the night air was cool again, just like the night of the first party. Marcia waited by her car. "Did you get what you needed?" she asked quietly. Elena smiled faintly. "I didn't go for what I needed," she said. "I went for what he deserved." Behind them, through the restaurant's glass windows, they could see the aftermath. David standing alone, security unplugging the projector, Sabrina storming out in tears, and when the screen went black, the narrator's voice would echo. She saw in his eyes the one thing she'd waited for, fear. By Monday morning, David Porter's empire had begun to crumble. News of the public confrontation spread faster than wildfire. Whispers became rumors, and rumors became headlines. At first it was just quiet talk among colleagues. Then someone leaked a video clip from the charity event, shaky phone-recorded footage of Elena's calm voice and the damning audio that followed. By noon it was everywhere. Businessman's wife exposes affair at fundraiser. Porter investments rocked by scandal. David's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Investors demanded explanations. His board of directors called an emergency meeting. And the PR team he'd once boasted about now scrambled to contain the damage. In the video, Elena looked unflinchingly composed. No tears, no shouting, just quiet power. Viewers admired her restraint. Some called her the definition of grace under fire. Others said she was the revenge story every betrayed woman dreams of. Elena didn't read the comments. She didn't have to. Her victory wasn't in the noise. It was in the silence that followed. The silence of a man who once loved attention, but now couldn't stand to leave his house. At home, David sat at the dining table surrounded by files, his hair disheveled, his confidence gone. He had called Eleanor 3 times that morning. She hadn't answered once. The 4th time she picked up. "Lena, please," he started, voice breaking. "We need to talk." She leaned back in her chair, the morning light soft on her face. "About what? The fraud or the affair?" He hesitated. "I messed up. I know that. But this is destroying everything I built." Elena's tone didn't waver. "You built it with lies, David. You can't be surprised it's collapsing." "Can't we fix this?" he said desperately. "You don't have to ruin me. We can settle quietly. Just take what you want and let me handle the rest." She smiled faintly. "I already did, David. I took my peace back." He didn't respond. Only his quiet, shaky breathing filled the silence before she ended the call. That afternoon, Marcia arrived at Elena's home holding a manila envelope. "It's official," she said, sitting across from her. "Your lawyer filed the case. The forged signature, the misused joint funds, it's airtight. Catherine said the evidence alone could get him charged." Elena nodded slowly. "And the house?" "You keep it," Marcia confirmed, "along with the lake cabin and half the company shares. He signed that transfer after you caught him trying to hide assets, but it backfired. You own the deed now." For the first time in months, Elena allowed herself to exhale. Marcia smiled. "You did it. You actually did it. Elena looked down at her hands. They didn't shake anymore. No, she said softly. He did it. I just stopped covering for him. Meanwhile, David's carefully curated world began to unravel. His company issued a formal statement announcing his temporary leave of absence. Investors pulled funding. The lake cabin, once his pride, now legally belonged to Elena and Sabrina. She disappeared the moment the scandal broke. One morning, David arrived at her apartment, the same one he'd been secretly funding, only to find it empty. Drawers cleared, key left on the counter, and a single note written in looping script. You promised me a future. I didn't sign up for a scandal. He crumpled the paper in his hand, the reality of his isolation finally settling in. Days turned into weeks. Elena didn't hear from him again, except through her attorney. The divorce proceeded swiftly, faster than anyone expected. When it finalized, she didn't attend the final hearing. Catherine went in her place. Instead, Elena spent that morning by the lake, the same lake where David once promised they'd grow old together. The sun was bright, the air clean, the surface calm. She stood at the edge of the dock, looking out over the water. In her hand was the bracelet he'd given her on their 10th anniversary, once a symbol of love, now a relic of deceit. She unclasped it, holding it for a moment before letting it fall into the water. The ripples spread wide, fading into stillness. Marcia's voice broke through her thoughts. You okay? Elena smiled faintly. For the first time in years, they sat together in silence, the kind of silence that doesn't hurt anymore. Across town, David's world continued to collapse. His accounts were frozen pending investigation. The company replaced him permanently. Friends he once bragged about stopped returning calls. One evening he sent one last message. I never meant to hurt you. I just wanted to feel alive again. Elena read it once, then deleted it without replying. She wasn't interested in his version of alive. He lost everything trying to impress a woman half her age, the narrator's voice would say softly. And she gained back everything he stole. Her freedom, her peace, and her name. Elena poured herself a glass of wine, sitting on the porch as the sunset painted the sky orange. The sound of the lake lapping against the dock filled the air. Calm, steady, final. She closed her eyes, the faint smile returning. Spring arrived quietly that year. The trees around the lake turned a bright, forgiving green, and the air carried that soft promise of things beginning again. For the first time in a long while, Elena Porter woke up without dread pressing on her chest. No phone calls from lawyers, no reporters outside her gate, no hollow silence waiting for her at breakfast. Just peace, plain and undramatic. Her mornings had changed. She brewed her coffee slowly, not rushing to fill the silence with noise. She walked barefoot across the cool wooden floors of her lake cabin now, watching sunlight spill through the wide windows. The house was still but alive. A framed photo sat on the mantel, not of her wedding, not of anniversaries, but of her children, Julia and Evan, smiling in front of her newly opened studio, Silverline Designs. It had been Marcia's idea. I've been designing homes all your life, she'd said. Might as well start building your own future too. So Elena had done just that. The studio, small but stylish, sat in the heart of downtown. She specialized in cozy interiors for women starting over, widows, divorcees, survivors. People came not just for her taste, but for her calm, steady presence. She never mentioned her past, but clients could sense the quiet strength behind her smile. Sometimes, when she stayed late at the studio, she'd look out through the glass window and see couples passing by, hands intertwined, laughter echoing in the distance. It didn't sting anymore. It just reminded her that love wasn't something to chase. It was something you honored when it was real and walked away from when it wasn't. She had become a woman who understood endings, not as failures, but as doorways.